How cheap can a house really be? Let us actually buy a grain silo and find out. You have driven past 10,000 of them without a second look. The tall, round steel bins standing beside barns all across the country. A lot of them sit empty now. A farmer will sell you a used one for a few $100s, sometimes less, because to him it is scrap taking up space. So here is the running total so far. One house shell, a few $100s. It sounds like the cheapest home in America, and for a moment it is. It is not going to stay that way, and the reason is sitting in the walls. That steel was built to keep grain dry and breathing, which is almost the exact opposite of keeping a person warm and dry. One whole silo home has been built for as little as $9,000. Finished ones sell for $500,000. Same steel can. By the end of this video, you will know what a grain silo really costs to live in, why the cheap shell is the trap, and exactly how a $9,000 bin turns into a $200,000 house. The buy-in. Start with the purchase, because this is the part everyone falls in love with. A grain bin is a tall, round, corrugated steel drum with a cone on top, the kind you see on every farm. As farms got bigger and grain storage moved to giant modern facilities, thousands of the older bins went obsolete. Now they stand empty in fields, and the people who own them mostly want them gone. That is your opening, and it is a real one. You will not find a cheaper way to start a house. Nobody has ever gone broke buying the bin. The bin never bankrupts anyone. What comes after it can. So the entry point is almost nothing. A used bin, bought straight off a farm or a marketplace, can run a few hundred to a few $1,000s, depending on size and how much rust it has. Rust is the one thing worth haggling hard over here. You can also buy a brand new kit, which costs more but arrives clean and undamaged. Either way, the shell is the cheapest line you will ever see on this build. Enjoy that number, because it is the last easy one. Then the tiers climb fast. The raw bin you convert yourself lands somewhere around $30 a square foot if you do the work. A professionally finished silo home runs far higher, often past $200,000 once it is actually livable. And a fully finished, listed silo house can carry a price like any other home. One recently sat on the market at nearly $500,000, 2 bedrooms on 10 acres. Same steel drum, wildly different receipts. Look at that spread. A few $100s for the can, $500,000 for the finished dream. The distance between those two numbers is this entire video. Same steel. And the lesson is right there at the start. You are not buying a house. You are buying a container built to hold corn, and you are about to ask it to hold a life. Corn and people want very different things from a wall. Get that one difference wrong, and everything downstream breaks. That is the whole story, and we are still only at the purchase. What you inherit, take the deal, and here is exactly what you are signing up to deal with. First, you inherit the shape. A grain bin is a circle. Every wall curves. The roof is a cone. And nothing you own, no couch, no cabinet, no bed frame, was designed for a round room. You will frame curved walls, waste awkward crescents of space, and rethink every square thing you own. A circle is charming in photos and stubborn in practice. Second, and this is the big one, you inherit the steel. Galvanized steel is honestly tough. It shrugs off fire, wind, and pests, and it will outlast a wood frame. But metal is a terrible insulator. It races to match whatever temperature is outside, and worse, it sweats. Warm inside air hits cold steel and condenses into water on the wall, and that water means mold, rust, and rot if you have not sealed the metal properly. The bin was built to let grain breathe. You need it to do the opposite. You are asking a ventilation machine to behave like a thermos. That is not a renovation, it is a reversal. You are undoing the one job the bin was designed for. Third, you inherit an empty can. A grain bin has no foundation for living. No floor, no plumbing, no wiring, no windows, and no insulation. It is a hollow drum. Everything that makes a house has to be added from scratch. You did not buy a house, you bought the outline of one. Everything inside that outline is still on your tab. A hollow drum is a promise, not a home. Fourth, you inherit the location and the paperwork. Most bins sit on rural land, and the local zoning may not even allow a dwelling there. You can own the bin outright and still not be allowed to sleep in it. Banks are wary of lending on something this unusual, so financing can be its own fight. The bank sees corn, you see a kitchen, and only one of you signs the loan. That gap between what it was and what you want is where the money lives. The revenue layers. There is too. So how does a grain silo actually pay you back? It does, in a few specific ways, and none of them look like a normal house. Layer 1 is the money you never spend. Done right. On a budget. A silo home can come in around $30 a square foot, well below the cost of building a conventional house of the same size. That gap is the real return. You are not earning rent, you are dodging a mortgage. A dollar you never borrow is the cleanest dollar there is. Money saved spends exactly like money earned. Layer 2 is the novelty rental. A silo home is a genuine conversation piece, and conversation pieces book. As a short-term rental or a rural cabin, the round steel drum pulls a premium precisely because there is nothing else like it on the listing page. People will pay extra to spend a weekend inside a grain bin. Novelty is a real product, and this one photographs well. A grain bin on a listing page stops the scroll. Curiosity is the whole marketing budget here. Layer 3 is durability. Galvanized steel does not need repainting, resists fire and high wind, and shrugs off termites and rot. Over the years, that means lower maintenance and often friendlier insurance than a wood house in the same field. Steel that ignores termites keeps paying you back quietly, year after year. Boring durability is an underrated way to make money. Layer 4 is the land itself. A bin usually comes with acreage, and a striking silo home makes that whole rural property more distinctive, more rentable, and easier to sell to the right buyer. A plain field with a silo home on it is no longer a plain field. Put it plainly. A silo earns as a saving and a novelty, not as an ordinary home. Price it as a saving and a story, and the numbers behave. Listen to that again. Here is the number that tells you what you are really buying. You can buy the bin for a few $100s. A whole silo home has been built for as little as $9,000. And yet a properly finished, insulated silo home routinely costs $200,000 or more, and one just listed for nearly $500,000. Same steel can, at every single one of those prices. The steel never changed, the math around it did. One structure, 100-fold spread in price. Nothing about the metal explains that gap, only the finishing does. Listen to that again. The gap between the $9,000 version and the $500,000 version is almost entirely the fight to make steel fit for a human being. The bin is the cheapest part of a silo house. Everything expensive is the war against the metal. Read the price tag on the bin as a down payment on a much bigger job. The bin is a coupon, not a total. The discount is on the wrapper, not the contents. So when someone shows you a grain bin and a tiny price tag, understand what you are seeing. You are not looking at the cost of the house. You are looking at the cost of the can the house goes inside. That one reframe will save you from the worst mistake in this whole game. Buy the can with your eyes open, and the rest is just planning. The ledger, turn to where the money actually goes, and watch the cheap house get expensive. First comes moving the bin and pouring a foundation. You cannot set a home on bare dirt, so a reinforced concrete slab goes in first, and that alone can cost more than the bin did many times over. The floor under your feet outcosts the walls around you. You pay house prices for the parts nobody photographs. Foundations are invisible and merciless that way. You spend the most on the parts no guest will ever see. Second comes insulation, and this is the single most important line in the entire build. Because bare steel sweats, you have to seal it. And the standard answer is closed cell spray foam applied right to the metal, thick enough to stop condensation and hold heat. Get this one layer right, and everything else is survivable. Some builders go further and put one bin inside another and fill the gap with foam. Skip this or cheap out on it, and the whole project rots from the walls in. This is the line where cheap silo homes quietly die. There is no cheap way out of a sweating wall. Third comes framing those curves, with special flexible track that bends to the round wall, slower and fiddlier than a straight stud wall. Every curve is a small tax you pay in labor. Fourth comes everything a house needs, and a bin does not have. Plumbing, Wiring, heating and cooling, and windows or skylights cut carefully into steel. Cutting a clean hole in a sealed can is its own small headache. And fifth comes the paperwork. Permits, zoning approval, and the financing workarounds for a home a bank has never seen before. None of those lines were printed on the price tag that sold you. Notice the shape of it. The bin was cheap. Making it fit for a person is the whole ledger. Add it up, and the corn can becomes a real house at a real house price. Cheap to buy, ordinary to finish. That is the whole equation. The trap. Here is the trap. And it catches the bargain hunter every time. The number that pulls you in, a few $100s for the shell, a $9,000 house, is the one number that has almost nothing to do with what you will actually spend. The cheap shell is the bait, and the bait is working the moment you feel clever for finding it. Remember what a grain bin was engineered to do. Keep grain dry, cool, and breathing, with air moving through it. That is the exact opposite of what a home needs, which is a sealed, insulated, climate-held box that keeps a person comfortable. So every dollar you spend after the purchase is spent fighting the building's own design. You are not renovating, you are arguing with an engineer who already won, and he built the whole thing to disagree with you. That is a very expensive argument to be on the losing side of. Buyers see $30 a square foot in a headline and forget that the finished, livable ones land closer to $200 a square foot. The cheapest house in America is only cheap for exactly as long as it is still a can. Turn it into a home, and it prices like a home. The word cheap quietly falls off the moment you move in. The moment you try to live in it, it starts charging you for everything it was never built to be. The can was always honest about what it is. The buyer was not. Honesty was in the steel all along, you just had to read it. The history digression. To understand why there are so many empty bins sitting around for you to buy, look at how they got there. As American farming mechanized, farmers stored their own grain right on the farm in these round galvanized bins, close to the field and cheap to build. For decades, every growing operation added more of them. Steel bins multiplied faster than the grain sometimes did. Then storage consolidated into enormous commercial facilities. Farms grew, and the older, smaller bins were left behind, empty and obsolete, scattered by the thousands across the countryside. A whole landscape of idle steel, waiting for a second life. Then someone had an idea. A family-owned manufacturer in Iowa named Sukup, one of the biggest grain bin makers in the country, turned its bins into homes. In 2010, after a devastating earthquake, the company adapted its grain bins into sturdy emergency shelters called Safe T homes and sent them to Haiti. Those steel shelters could stand up to disasters that flattened conventional buildings. A grain bin, it turned out, was tougher than most houses. That idea came home, and the company now sells grain bin homes in the United States. The empty bin in the field stopped being scrap and started being a house waiting to happen. One company had turned a scrap problem into a product line. Scarcity of purpose became abundance of supply, and that supply is your bargain. Their loss of a use became your cheap raw material, the death spiral. Now watch how the silo dream turns into a money pit, because it follows the same pattern almost every time. A buyer sees the headline, a house for the price of a used car. Confidence is very cheap at that stage, and it gets expensive right around the insulation. He buys a cheap bin, pictures a cozy round retreat, and starts building with a thin budget, certain he can beat the numbers everyone else quotes. That certainty rarely survives contact with the insulation bill. Then the metal fights back. To save money, he goes light on the insulation, the one line he could not afford to cut. The steel sweats. Water beads on the inside of the walls. Mold creeps in behind the finish, and rust starts eating the shell he thought would last forever. The one corner he cut is the one that sinks him. Meanwhile, the permit office wants changes he did not budget for, and the bank will not lend against a half-finished grain bin, so the cash has to come out of his own pocket. The savings he bragged about vanish into foam and rust repair. Now he is stuck. He has spent real money, and he owns a damp, moldy steel drum he cannot comfortably live in and cannot easily sell. He owns the most expensive cheap house in the county. He saved on the exact line that mattered most, and the building is failing from the walls inward. That is the whole cautionary tale of this asset. The cheap shell was never the hard part. Cheap got him in the door, and cheap is what ruined him. The metal was, and it does not negotiate. Steel keeps its own books, and it always collects. You can defer the bill, but you cannot dodge it. The survivors, so who converts a grain silo and actually ends up ahead? The winners all understand one thing. They are not fighting the price of a house. They are fighting the nature of steel. First, they never skimp on insulation. The closed-cell spray foam is the one line they fund completely, because it is the entire battle against condensation, and everything else depends on winning it. Win the wall, and the rest of the house is just carpentry. Lose the wall, and no finish on earth will save you. Second, they budget honestly. They ignore the $9,000 headline and plan for a real finished cost, often $150,000 to $250,000. And they are pleasantly surprised only if it comes in under that. Plan for the real number, and the project stops ambushing you. Third, they solve the paperwork before they buy. They confirm the zoning allows a home, they line up permits, and they arrange cash or a construction loan, because a bank will rarely hand out a normal mortgage on a grain bin. Fourth, they monetize the novelty. They run the finished silo as a premium short-term rental, where the round steel drum is the entire selling point, and they let curiosity pay the bills. The weirdness that scares a lender is the same weirdness that fills a calendar. A bank sees a risk, a traveler sees a reason to book. Same weird building, two completely different verdicts. And fifth, they design with the circle instead of against it. They lean into the round rooms, the height, and the industrial look, rather than trying to force a square house into a cylinder. Fight the circle, and the circle wins every time. Work with the shape, and it stops costing you. The verdict: so does turning a grain silo into a home actually work? It comes down to one honest question. Did you pay to beat the metal, or did you try to live cheap inside a can built for corn? Picture the good version. You bought a cheap bin, you insulated it properly, you sorted the permits before you started, and you designed with the round shape. Now you own a durable, low-maintenance, one-of-a-kind home that cost well under a conventional build, and it earns extra as a novelty rental. The math finally works because you let it. Respect the metal, and the metal finally pays. The saving is real, and the novelty pays. That is the version worth chasing. Now, the bad version. You chased the headline price, skimped on the foam, hit a zoning wall, could not get financing, and ended up with a sweating, rusting steel you cannot live in or unload. Same silo on the same patch of land. Two owners, two completely different endings. The bin did not decide which one you got. Your budget did. The difference is entirely whether you respected what the metal is and paid to change it, or tried to move into it on the cheap and lost. One owner bought a home. The other bought a very expensive lesson in metal. So look again at what you were really buying. Not the cheapest house in America, not a steel drum you could pick up for the price of a used car and just move into. You were buying a machine built to keep grain dry and breathing, and a long bill to make it do the opposite, to hold a person, sealed and warm, for years. That was the deal all along, hidden inside a tiny price tag. The bin was never the cost. The war against the metal was. That single sentence is the entire build in 8 words. A grain silo was built to hold what pours in, and let the rest breathe out. Ask it to hold a life instead, and it will. But only after you have paid, in full, for everything it was never designed to do.